Empress Victoria's diaries, scandal, sorrow and sass in the Prussian court, aka she wrote the whole court to filth, in cursive. Welcome back to Past People, where diaries never stay private, everyone's emotionally repressed, and historical women write better clapbacks than Twitter ever could. Today's queen of shade, grief and intellectual burn, Empress Victoria of Germany, aka Vicky, aka the daughter of Queen Victoria who spent her life writing furious, heartfelt and occasionally petty as hell letters from inside the most soul-destroying court in Europe, Prussia. She was brilliant, she was kind, she was liberal, and she was married into a country that basically responded, another woman with thoughts, but she wasn't going down without a monogrammed notebook and a really sharp fountain pen. So pull up a chaise lounge, light a candle like you're reading Jane Eyre, and prepare yourself, because Vicky's diaries were everything. The pen is mightier than the Prussians. Born in 1840, Vicky is Queen Victoria's first child, and immediately her intellectual golden girl. Her parents, Victoria and Prince Albert, decide she's going to be a symbol of everything good and British and moral, so naturally they send her to Germany. She's married off at 17 to Prince Frederick of Prussia, a good man, bless him, and suddenly finds herself in Berlin, where all hopes, dreams and casual emotional warmth go to die. Now Vicky could have swallowed her emotions like every other 19th century aristocrat, but instead she wrote letters, diaries, memoirs, notes, pages and pages of beautifully composed, emotionally charged, deeply insightful documents, and best of all, she knew people would read them. This woman archived her own misery. Court life? She hated it here. Let's get one thing clear. The Prussian court was not Downton Abbey. It was not Bridgerton. It was Game of Thrones with more uniforms and less kissing. And Vicky, she hated every second. The Prussian royals were cold, militaristic, hostile to anything British, and allergic to women with opinions. Imagine trying to introduce a little feminism, art and parliamentary reform to a court that thinks the ideal woman is silent, German and shaped like a Christmas nutcracker. She's writing to Queen Victoria like, "Mother dearest, I am trying so hard not to cry on the upholstery. Everyone here is made of granite and Prussian pride." Queen Victoria, naturally, responds with Victorian tough love, i.e., "Darling, chin up, never let them see your emotional trauma, and remember, they are all beneath you. Love, Mummy." Motherhood, heartbreak, and Kaiser regret. As if being a political prisoner in pearls wasn't enough, Vicky now has to pop out heirs. And so enters Wilhelm, her firstborn son, aka that guy who will one day become Kaiser Wilhelm II and personally sabotage Europe. Wilhelm's birth is traumatic, and due to a breech delivery and some truly medieval medical interventions, his left arm is permanently damaged. And who do the Prussians blame? Vicky. Not the doctors, not fate, not like physics. Nope. Must be the British girl's fault. Vicky is devastated. She pours everything, her guilt, her fear, her anger, into her letters. She writes, "I only wish he knew how I would have given my own arm to spare him." Meanwhile, Wilhelm grows up distant, cruel, and emotionally hostile. He mocks her Britishness, he disrespects her at court. He grows a moustache so large it has its own diplomatic policy. And through it all, Vicky writes about the pressure, about the silence, about how much she misses the intellectual freedom of home, about how no one in Germany reads Jane Austen, and it's clearly a national crisis. The pettiness in her pen game. Now, don't get it twisted, Vicky wasn't always doom and gloom. She had a razor-sharp wit. Her letters are full of political snark, observations about hairstyles and etiquette, deep shade thrown at court rivals, and the occasional "how dare they wear that hat in front of me" entry. She writes one letter describing a lady at court who dared to flirt with her husband as having the expression of a malfunctioning horse. She shaded her enemies so beautifully you'd think she invented the subtweet. She also had zero time for Prussian traditions. She once wrote, "They expect women to be silent, submissive, and stupid. I am none of the three, and I do not apologize." Mic drop. Widowhood, exile, and the final entries. Eventually, her beloved husband Fritz becomes emperor, and promptly dies of throat cancer 99 days later. Vicky becomes a widow. Her son Wilhelm becomes Kaiser, and her life gets infinitely worse. He pushes her out of court, bans her from political life, tells her she's not allowed to publish her husband's papers, and built himself an empire on everything she hated. So she retreats to Friedrichshof, her palace in the countryside, and writes even more. Her diaries from these years are painful. She writes about grief, about missed opportunities, about watching the world she tried to build fall apart. She documents her failing health, her isolation, her rage at the government, and her slow, quiet heartbreak over her son. And then she writes about war, because in 1900 she sees it coming. She writes that Wilhelm's obsession with war and empire will destroy everything, that his hatred of Britain and obsession with military expansion will lead to a catastrophe no one is prepared for. She writes that and dies in 1901, just months after her mother, Queen Victoria. She knew it was coming. For decades, historians ignored Vicky. They saw her as a failure, the liberal who never ruled, the mother of a warmongering son, the woman who couldn't handle the Prussian court. But then her letters were published, and suddenly everyone saw her. A woman of intelligence, clarity, humour, and enormous emotional power, who spent her whole life being silenced and just kept writing anyway. She wrote, "If I cannot speak at court, I will speak through paper." And she did. 8,000 letters. Diaries, memoirs, sketches, history, politics, private pain, all laid bare in ink. And now we read her because she made sure we could. So here's to Empress Victoria, the royal diarist of doom, sass, and survival. She outwrote the Prussian court, she outlasted her critics, and she left a paper trail of feminism, heartbreak, and absolutely glorious shade. Let this be your reminder. When the world says be quiet, you write louder. Until next time, keep your pens sharp and your enemies poorly described in footnotes. You're watching Past People, where the court's cold, but the ink is spicy. Victoria's guilt trip, the daughter who died trying to please her mother, aka the emotional abuse arc of Princess Alice. Welcome back to Past People, the place where historical side characters get the full main character glow-up they deserve, especially the ones steamrolled by their own family. Today's victim? Princess Alice, Queen Victoria's second daughter. The emotionally intelligent one, the compassionate one, the one who deserved a therapist, a hug, and a break from her guilt-tripping, emotionally constipated mother. This is the story of a woman who lived her whole life trying to win the love of a monarch who simply wasn't capable. Get your tissues and your tiaras, because this is the emotional abuse arc of Queen Victoria's saddest daughter. Princess Alice, the underrated emotional support child. Let's set the stage. It's April 1843, and Queen Victoria has just given birth to her third child, Alice. She's not the heir, she's not the spare, she's there. While Vicky, the eldest daughter, is being praised for her cleverness and Bertie is being groomed as the Prince of Wales, with very low expectations, mind you, Alice is quietly absorbing every emotional tremor in the royal household. She's the child who feels everything, the one who tries to smooth things over, the one who keeps the peace. And oh honey, in the House of Windsor, that job should have come with hazard pay. Queen Victoria, motherhood isn't her thing. Now, it's no secret that Queen Victoria didn't exactly enjoy being a mother. She once wrote that babies are frog-like and hideous. She viewed pregnancy as an exhausting inconvenience and childbirth as a temporary curse sent from above. So when little Alice showed empathy, depth, and an actual emotional compass, Victoria was confused, irritated even. Victoria didn't want her children to feel things. She wanted obedience, loyalty, and above all, emotional distance. Alice, unfortunately, couldn't help but care. The death of Prince Albert. Alice becomes the replacement spouse. In 1861, when Prince Albert died, Victoria fell apart like a Regency sofa in a thunderstorm. And who stepped up to keep the monarchy and the mother afloat? Alice. She was 18 years old. While her siblings floundered or fled, Alice moved into Windsor and became Victoria's unofficial therapist, secretary, and spiritual crutch. She sat with her, she wrote letters for her, she listened to her grief for hours on end. And Victoria, being Victoria, promptly became dependent on Alice and then resented her for it. Classic narcissist behaviour. The marriage betrayal. Alice tries to have a life. Now here's where things get tragic and dramatic. Alice falls in love. She meets Louis of Hesse, a sweet, if slightly bland, German prince with a decent chin and questionable finances. She wants to marry him. Victoria is appalled. He's not rich enough, not powerful enough, not worthy of her daughter, who's now become her personal grief pillow. But Alice pushes through. She wants a life, a family, some autonomy, and after months of sulking, letter writing, and melodrama, Victoria agrees. She does attend the wedding, but oh honey, she attends it in full widow mode. It was just months after Prince Albert's death, and Queen Victoria made sure the wedding felt more like a funeral than a celebration. She wore black. Everyone else wore black. The ceremony, dripping in mourning crepe and emotional repression. There were more tears than toasts, and instead of joy, the mood was mournfully polite. Because how dare Alice try to be happy? Alice in Hesse, queen of budget royalty. So off Alice goes to Darmstadt, a place that's basically the Lidl of European royal courts. She's got little money, a dull court, and a kind but painfully boring husband. But does she sulk? No. Alice throws herself into charity work, hospital reform, nursing, and parenthood. She writes beautiful letters. She lectures her husband about progressive ideas. She literally teaches villagers about hygiene and midwifery in the 1860s. Meanwhile, Victoria writes her letters with increasing coldness. She criticizes Alice's tone, accuses her of being too emotional, tells her to stop being so soft. Imagine getting passive-aggressive letters from your mother while treating typhoid patients in a converted cow barn. Unreal. The Tragedy of Fritty, where the curse begins. In 1873, Alice's son Friedrich, or Fritty, dies of haemophilia. He fell out of a window and the internal bleeding couldn't be stopped. Alice was inconsolable. She wrote about it endlessly, unable to process the loss. Her whole body and spirit broke. And what does Queen Victoria do? She sends a short note. No visit, no real comfort, just more guilt, more emotional distance, as if to say, this is what happens when you live far away from your mother. Victoria, the letter bomber. Now we need to talk about the letters, because Queen Victoria's weapon of choice was the guilt-riddled correspondence. Alice would write things like, I am tired, dear mamma. I do not know if I can do this much longer. And Victoria would reply, one must never give way to one's feelings. You must consider your duty to your husband and station. I am disappointed. Every time Alice opened an envelope, it was like receiving an emotional landmine from Buckingham Palace. The diphtheria outbreak. Alice's final sacrifice. Cut to 1878. Diphtheria sweeps through Alice's household. One by one her children fall ill, including her youngest, Marie. Alice kisses Marie goodbye. Marie dies. Then her son Ernest breaks down, grieving his sister. Alice comforts him, kisses him too, and within days she has diphtheria. Alice dies on December 14th, 1878, the anniversary of her father Prince Albert's death. She was 35 years old. And Queen Victoria? She didn't come to the funeral. She wrote in her diary about how dreadful the day was because of Albert. Alice's death was just a footnote. Alice didn't get statues. She didn't get poems. She didn't even get much credit. But her children would change history. Alex, her youngest surviving daughter, became the last Empress of Russia, murdered in a basement in 1918. Victoria, another daughter, became the matriarch of European royalty, grandmother of Prince Philip. Ernest went on to rule Hesse with a haunted heart. And Alice? She was remembered, barely, as the serious one, the sickly one, the mother of the Romanovs. Let's call it what it is. Alice died trying to please her mother. She gave everything, her youth, her health, her happiness, trying to earn Queen Victoria's impossible approval. And Victoria? She mourned her husband for 40 years. She mourned her dogs longer than she mourned Alice. This is what happens when emotional intelligence meets emotional neglect, when love tries to grow in the shadow of monarchy. Princess Alice wasn't cold, distant, or vain. She was brave, she was kind, she was exhausted, and she was more royal in spirit than her mother ever was. So here's to Alice, the daughter who deserved better. May she rest where guilt can't reach her anymore. Rest in peace, Victorian angel. We remember. If this one hit you in the Historical Trauma Centre, leave a candle emoji in the comments. Subscribe for more Past People, where history isn't boring, it's bleak, bougie, and bizarre. The Queen will write you now. The letters that bound Princess Helena to her mother, aka how Queen Victoria used a pen to chain her daughter for life. Welcome back to Past People, the place where side royals get main character treatment and history's dear mama turns out to be a control freak with a fountain pen. Today we're diving into the life and letterbox of Princess Helena, Queen Victoria's third daughter and quite possibly the most emotionally blackmailed woman in Buckingham Palace. Because Queen Victoria didn't just send letters, she weaponized them. And Lincoln? She never stood a chance. Who was Princess Helena? The quiet one. Born in 1846, Princess Helena, known as Lincoln, was the third daughter and fifth child of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. She wasn't flashy like Vicky. She wasn't the favourite like Alice. She was dependable, practical, emotionally steady, the royal equivalent of a Victorian cardigan. She loved reading, sewing, writing, and later nursing and translating. But most of all, she loved pleasing her mother. And Queen Victoria? Oh, she loved being pleased. Until she didn't. The letters begin. Dearest child. From an early age, Victoria's letters to Helena were direct, cold, and crammed with expectation. They start like this. Dearest Helena, I trust you will show yourself worthy of your position, but quickly escalate to, you must not imagine you know better than I do. Victoria wrote letters like she was drafting military orders. Helena was scolded for being too emotional, not writing often enough, asking too many questions, daring to voice her own opinion. You know, all the things daughters do when they're trying to develop a personality. Lincoln falls in love. Enter Christian of Schleswig-Holstein. Helena's one act of rebellion, if you can call it that, was falling in love with Prince Christian of Schleswig-Holstein, a minor German royal, Lutheran, over a decade older, decent moustache, not politically useful. Victoria was horrified. He is dull, she wrote. It is a very poor match for one of my daughters. And thus began the great guilt letter cascade of 1865 to 66. Victoria wrote that Helena was selfish for wanting to marry, that she was abandoning her duty to stay with Mama, that no one will understand what you do to me by this. Helena responded with grovelling apologies and declarations of love. She begged her mother not to be angry. She asked permission again and again, and when Victoria finally relented, it wasn't out of grace. It was because she'd emotionally browbeaten Helena into promising never to leave England. So yes, she got married on a leash. Married but never free, the letters keep coming. You'd think after the wedding the emotional micromanaging would stop. Oh no, it intensified. Helena and Christian settled into a quiet life at Frogmore, but Victoria demanded daily updates. Letters flew in with criticism of how Helena dressed her children, displeasure at the guests she entertained, instructions on what time to eat dinner. Victoria would write things like, "You do not write as you used to. Is your affection cooling? I am not pleased with your tone. You must be respectful." Lenkin had 5 children, constant royal duties, and a husband with health issues, but Mama still needed to be emotionally maintained. The guilt never ends. "If I die, you will regret your behaviour." The letters grew darker over time. Whenever Helena pushed back even slightly, Victoria twisted the knife. She threatened illness. She threatened grief. "I suffer much when I see how little you care to be near me. You may regret it when I am gone, but then it will be too late." Imagine receiving Victorian emotional blackmail in cursive, sealed with a crown. It was a paper trail of psychological control. Victoria never screamed. She wrote you into guilt paralysis. Helena the nurse, her escape into service. To cope, Helena threw herself into nursing and medical reform. She helped found the British Red Cross. She championed nurse training, homeopathy, and hospital sanitation. She translated important medical texts. She even wrote publicly under her own name, a big deal for a royal woman at the time. It was the one place she felt in control. But even then, Victoria would write, "Your duties as a nurse must never interfere with your duties as a daughter." Girl couldn't catch a break. After Victoria's death, freedom, kind of. When Queen Victoria finally died in 1901, Helena was 54. She had spent her entire adult life under a barrage of instructions, corrections, and guilt trips. And yet she mourned her mother deeply. Because that's the final twist in this story. Helena loved her mother desperately. She wanted the approval. She wanted the warmth. She wanted to believe the letters meant love, even though they were laced with poison. Why this matters. The daughter who stayed. Helena didn't flee to Germany like Vicky. She didn't die young, like Alice. She didn't go mad, like Beatrice, arguable. She stayed. She served. She endured. Her letters reveal a woman trapped in a palace-shaped prison, built not with stone, but with ink and expectation. She wasn't just a royal, she was a victim of generational dysfunction, monarch edition. Princess Helena is often forgotten in royal history. No scandals, no thrones, no tragic assassinations, but her letters tell a richer story, one of quiet endurance, unspoken pain, and a daughter who was never really allowed to grow up. So here's to Helena, the emotional punching bag of the crown, the pen pal princess, the woman who wrote back even when it broke her. Rest in peace, Lenkin. May your inbox be empty at last. If you've ever received a toxic message from a parent, sibling, or monarch, hit that like button. Subscribe for more Past People, where even the quiet ones get their long overdue chaos arc. Unladylike Letters. Princess Louise and Queen Victoria, aka the artist, the scandal, and the mother who said no to everything. Welcome back to Past People, where royal daughters get creative, rebellious, and tragically smothered by a mother whose idea of freedom was changing black to mauve after a full decade of mourning. Today's firecracker? Princess Louise, Queen Victoria's 6th child and the royal who said, "Actually, I'd like a job, thanks." Louise was an artist, a sculptor, a proto-feminist, a woman who posed nude for herself. She wanted more than embroidery, etiquette, and emotionally rigid German cousins. And the letters between her and Queen Victoria? Let's just say they're less warm and fuzzy, more please stop breathing near scandal. So buckle up for passive-aggressive correspondence, artistic ambition with zero royal support, and a marriage that made Victorian society whisper behind fans. This is the story of Princess Louise, her rebellious pen, and the mother who loved her, but absolutely did not understand her. Louise, the different one. Born in 1848, Princess Louise grew up in the middle of the royal pack, and while her sisters were happy-ish, with domestic life, tiaras, and writing letters about children's coughs, Louise was not that girl. She was sharp-witted, creative, wildly independent, and utterly unimpressed with court protocol. As a teenager, she shocked everyone by saying she wanted to be a professional sculptor. Queen Victoria? Horrified. Ladies do not chisel, Louise. They pose. Louise? Then they're boring. Letters full of eye rolls. The letters between Louise and Queen Victoria read like a Victorian version of a teenage text argument. Louise writes, "I do not wish to sit at drawing rooms making small talk. I wish to work with my hands." Victoria, "Then knit." Louise, "I mean clay. I have a sculpture commission." Victoria, "How very unsuitable. One cannot be both royal and dusty." Louise kept pushing. She enrolled in the National Art Training School under an assumed name, which was very awkward when people recognised her face on coins. Meanwhile, Victoria complained in letters to other family members about how Louise was too forward, too modern, and altogether lacking in proper decorum. Translation: she had thoughts and wasn't afraid to express them. Now, Louise's letters really start heating up when we enter scandal territory. First, the rumours. Louise was linked to her sculpting tutor, a servant, a female artist, basically anyone her mother disapproved of. At one point, a letter arrives accusing her of posing nude for her own sculpture, which would have been wildly modern and deeply no thank you by Victorian standards. Louise denies it, but the press eats it up like scandal-flavoured sponge cake. Queen Victoria, apoplectic. "You shall not be alone with men. You shall not be alone with yourself." Louise, cool. Can I at least keep my studio? There was where it gets juicy. Louise decides that she wants to marry someone not royal, a shock at the time. She proposes marrying John Campbell, Marquis of Lorne, a Scottish aristocrat and future Governor-General of Canada. Queen Victoria initially says absolutely not. No royal has ever married a commoner. Louise replies basically, "Then maybe it's time one did." And the Crown shudders. After months of back and forth letters, arguments, emotional blackmail, and lots of Queen Victoria writing things like, "But who will sit with me and carry my gloves?" Victoria relents. Barely. And Louise marries Lorne in 1871. The wedding is awkward. The court disapproves. The newspapers are scandalised. Louise? Thrilled. For about 5 minutes. Louise and Lorne's marriage had all the elements of a Gothic novel. Ice-cold letters, mutual indifference, possibly no intimacy, and very separate bedrooms. Rumours swirl for years that Lorne was not interested in women. Louise, meanwhile, throws herself into art, travel, and being fabulous in Canada, while her husband tried to govern things and quietly fade into the wallpaper. Her letters to Victoria during this time are strained. Louise writes, "Lorne is very occupied. We rarely dine together." Victoria, "Make yourself agreeable, darling. Wives must be useful, even if bored." Louise, "Yes, Mamma, very useful indeed." Cue her taking solo sketching trips into the Canadian wilderness. Icon. After Queen Victoria dies in 1901, Louise breathes a little easier. She never has children, she never remarries, she never stops working. She becomes a patron of women's education, supports suffrage quietly but firmly, advocates for artists and reform, continues sculpting until her hands fail. Her later letters, now to friends and colleagues, are drier, cleverer, full of independence and sharp commentary. She basically turns into a Victorian auntie with boundary issues removed, and I love that for her. And when she dies in 1939, at the age of 91, she is the last surviving child of Queen Victoria, the final letter writer, the last rebel, and probably the only one who truly got out. So here's to Princess Louise, the artist, the scandal magnate, the Victorian escapee. She pushed against the palace walls until they cracked. She sculpted her own identity, even when her mother tried to erase it. And she left behind not just letters, but legacies. So the next time someone tells you not to pursue your art career because it's unladylike, just remember, Princess Louise posed nude for herself, wrote her mother a note about it, and then went to Canada. Stay past people and carve your own story, even if your mum is the Empress of India. The final favourite, Princess Beatrice and Queen Victoria's letters, aka Mummy's little secretary for life. Welcome back to Past People, the place where royal daughters can't catch a break. Their pens are mightier than their coronets, and Queen Victoria emotionally entraps her offspring one by one like Pokemon. Today's story is about Princess Beatrice, Queen Victoria's youngest daughter, constant companion and full-time emotional support scullery maid. This woman didn't just get letters from her mother, she lived inside them and then spent her entire adult life transcribing, editing and preserving them like a Victorian version of Microsoft Word with a corset. This is the tale of the most codependent relationship in British royal history, the letters that shaped an empire's legacy, and the woman who gave up everything for a job she never applied for. So grab your monogrammed blotting paper, your mourning veil, and a cup of something stronger than tea, because this is the chronically sacrificial life of Princess Beatrice and her never-ending letters from Queen Victoria, the baby who never left. Let's start in 1857. Queen Victoria has popped out 8 children already. She's tired. Prince Albert is still emotionally intense. And then comes Beatrice, the 9th and final royal baby. Nicknamed Baby for decades, Beatrice is bright, gentle, musical, and deeply adored by both parents. Then, in 1861, everything changes. Prince Albert dies. Queen Victoria goes full Gothic widow mode, and little Beatrice, age 4, becomes her emotional comfort blanket. The older kids, married off, shipped out, but not Beatrice. No, she's special. She's staying. Victoria says, "I cannot imagine life without her." And what begins is a relationship that's less mother and daughter and more one-woman royal therapy program. You shall not marry. As Beatrice grows up, she becomes her mother's shadow. Literally. She sits beside her at every meeting, accompanies her to every event, sleeps next door, reads aloud, takes dictation, writes letters, comforts her through every mood swing. Beatrice's life becomes one long string of "Yes, Mama," "No, Mama," "Would you like the draft of your letter to Disraeli, Mama?" But Beatrice dares to fall in love. Enter Prince Henry of Battenberg, a handsome, charming, and frankly too good for this family minor royal. They meet, they flirt, they whisper sweet nothings over piano duets, and Beatrice swoons. She tells her mother, and Queen Victoria goes into a full emotional meltdown. Letters fly like cannon fire. Victoria writes, "You would abandon me, your poor old mother, to loneliness and despair, after all I have suffered." Beatrice, "Mama, he's lovely, and I'm 27. Please." "Only if you both live with me forever, and you continue your secretarial duties." Beatrice agrees, because of course she does. Letters, loss, and a war she didn't want. So Beatrice marries Henry, who is now not just a prince, but a prisoner at court. He's kind, funny, popular, and utterly wasted in Queen Victoria's orbit. Desperate for freedom, he volunteers for the Ashanti War in West Africa in 1895, just to get away from Windsor. Beatrice writes,
I fear his leaving, and yet I understand it. There is no room for men to breathe at court.
Victoria, of course, hates this. She tries to stop him, sends letters, threatens disinheritance. But Henry goes anyway, and dies of malaria en route home. Beatrice is devastated. Her letters to Victoria become uncharacteristically angry.
Why must everything I love be taken from me?
Victoria, suddenly facing a broken daughter, becomes briefly human. She writes,
You are not alone, my darling baby. I know this pain too well.
It's the one moment of mutual emotional honesty they share. But then, back to work. Life after Mother, the monumental task. Queen Victoria dies in 1901 after 40 years of widowhood and codependence. Beatrice, now in her 40s, a widow and emotionally stunted from decades of service, is suddenly alone. But not for long, because she now has a new job editing her mother's massive collection of letters and diaries. How massive? Try 141 volumes, 111 years' worth of documents, and more opinions than the entire House of Lords. Beatrice spends the next 3 decades carefully, dutifully editing every sentence. She removes scandals, softens criticism, deletes anything too political, too sharp, too unflattering. And what's left? The carefully curated image of Queen Victoria as the pure, wise, grieving widow empress, not the messy, manipulative, letter-bombing monarch she truly was. Historians would scream at her for this, but Beatrice saw it differently. To her, it was an act of love. The final letter she would ever write, not on paper, but in history itself. Who was Beatrice, really? This is the real tragedy of Beatrice. She was intelligent, musical, capable, loyal. She had ideas, talents, dreams. She loved fiercely. She felt deeply. But she was raised in a household where daughters were useful, not free. Where letters were not just communication, they were emotional traps wrapped in black-edge stationery. She existed not to become her own person, but to reflect back the needs of her mother. In one letter, she wrote,
I have known no other life but this, the waiting, the writing, the watching.
And that is what she became. A royal ghost. A woman whose every word was someone else's. So here's to Princess Beatrice, Queen Victoria's last daughter, last shadow, last living bookmark in a story far too long and far too sad. She didn't get the freedom she deserved. She didn't get the love she wanted. But she left behind the story her mother wanted told, and that, for better or worse, shaped how we remember the Victorian era. So the next time you find yourself editing a text to your mum for the 3rd time, just be grateful she's not expecting you to archive her entire reign and live in her attic. Until next time, stay past people. And maybe don't agree to transcribe your mother's private diary for 30 years.